Hi, I am a white, heterosexual, able-bodied, born female, identifying as female, who came here today to talk about privilege. Here's a brief but ever-growing list of reasons why I'm so scared to do this. I'm scared to share all of my ignorance. I'm scared you'll listen to me first instead of to the people who bear the brunt of my privilege. I'm scared I won't say the right things. I'm scared I won't say enough. I'm scared I'll alienate people. I'm scared I'll seem like I have it all figured out. I'm scared I'll seem like I have nothing figured out. I'm scared that my scope is too wide. I'm scared my scope isn't wide enough. I'm scared my experiences are too limiting to deliver this talk. I'm scared I won't tell my family's story right. And despite all of this, I feel I've been waiting to talk about this since I was 10 years old. Because that was when I was forced to confront my complacency and injustice. And I want to help all of us do the same today. Most people meet their new siblings in the delivery room, but I met mine in the airport, twice. The first time it happened was the summer of 2004, and I was 9. My grandparents, my older brother Johnny, and I drove to O'Hare to pick up our parents and new Ethiopian siblings. Walking into the terminal, the air felt electric. I kept stretching to look over the heads of people in front of me until finally, after what felt like an hour in my memory, my sunburnt and beaming dad pushed past with my new little sister perched on his shoulders. McDelouet. She was even more wide-eyed in person and so little, sweetly wrapped in this bright sundress we'd picked out for her. Just behind them, not as burnt but still beaming, was my mom with my new younger brother standing next to her. Head held high, looking just as confident in his new home as he did in his old one. Zerahun. Fast forward 2 years. A similar scene, but with a few welcome additions. Zerahun, McDelouet, my dad, and I eagerly waited to greet our older sister. Now, as their biological sister, she wasn't new to them, but our excitements felt equally high. And once again, through the airtight crowd at O'Hare, our little lady army, literally, my mom, my grandma, and my older sister are all about 5'2", pushed past. Brickty, my sister, grinning wider than I'd ever seen in person, braced for the January chill in her pink, green, and blue striped sweater. My mom and grandma were trying their best to smile through the happy tears brought on by the real reunion happening in front of them. Zerahun, Brickty, and McDelouet were no longer continents away after 2 years of being apart. Now, Brickty's arrival in 2007 completed our now 7-person mixed-race family. And this combination brought with it a series of new experiences which made me confront and own my complacency and injustice. Experiences which changed the way I understood my own privilege, and especially how it made my lived experience so different from those with less privilege. And for reference, when I say privileged, I'm talking about anyone living in what society has deemed the default. So for me, that's white, heterosexual, able-bodied, cisgender, or born female identifying as female, and Catholic. The only underprivileged identity I hold is female. And there are things that I receive in society simply because of these identities, and not because I did anything to deserve them. Underprivileged or marginalized means anyone who claims different identities. And these people are limited in society regardless of their actions, simply because they cannot or do not claim the same identities as me. And this was a definition I wasn't able to articulate until I was in college. And before then, I just knew that I could feel it. I felt it first when I was 10. Zerahun and McDelouet had just started Little League soccer, and during his time in Ethiopia, Zerahun got really good at soccer, like to the point where the other team was more of an annoyance than an actual challenge. So he walked into every game with his head held high, exuding even more of that signature confidence than normal. So I knew something was wrong when he walked towards my mom and I with his head down and this absent-minded look on his face. He spoke softly, on the verge of tears, about a boy on his soccer team who had told my brother, "Go back to your country." And Zerahun said these words, and I felt the color drain from my face, and I started to apologize to him. But my mom pulled him aside because she knew even then that making sure Zerahun felt empowered and safe was so much more important than offering apologies or guilt. But I felt so powerless. I mean, I knew that hateful people like this existed somewhere, but how could someone like that exist in my life, in our life, mine and my amazing brothers? And what hurt even more was we had gone through so much to bring Zerahun into this country, into our family, and this 9-year-old boy wished him away so easily. It cut me deeply, but not as deeply as I'm sure it cut my brother. I stood on the sidelines, wildly affected, and yet not affected at all. It was my first time being forced to confront my complacency, a revealing of my privilege and my first cutting truth. I was as close to this situation as I could get without being in it. And I carry this idea around with me daily. Being the sibling to 3 African people does not make me less white. It makes me more aware, but no less privileged. I carried this idea with me to college, and still I was confronted with another shade of my complacency. As an on-campus leader, I was involved in some large group racial caucusing, wherein our large group of student leaders separated into smaller, more specific racial groups and shared our experiences within that race. Coming back together in the larger group, tensions were high, and I found I was more aware than ever of our different racial identities. And I listened, as person of color after person of color shared their stories. Some were angry, some were frustrated, but I found that universally, each story came from a place of pain. We were maybe 20 minutes in when I realized I had been shaking, crying, and silent the entire time. And the pit in my stomach rose into my throat when the other white students began to beg that the students of color just be patient with us, to trust that we were trying to understand, but we needed them to be gentle. And in response, a friend of mine and a woman of color spoke through the break in her voice. "We're talking about the oppression of me and my people. You need to be gentle with me." And I sat up a little straighter because, again, there I was, wildly affected and yet not affected at all. Again, I confronted my complacency and acknowledged another cutting truth. As a person of privilege, I have a responsibility to stop asking marginalized people to explain their pain to me. And instead, I need to do the work to understand. And this means researching the history of oppression, staying informed through daily news, and opening myself up to hearing what I can do better. To go to protests, rallies, and events where marginalized people are at the forefront. I need to do the work and then go home. To talk with my family, my friends, and the people in my privileged communities about so many of the prejudices that continue to be revealed. To mobilize them and invite them to join in the work. Asking people in marginalized communities to constantly be explaining why their lives matter and why they need a world that's built for them too is beyond unfair. My most recent confrontation with complacency came during a performance and inspired me to pursue advocating for diversity in the arts as a career. I spent 4 months interning at Second City, the world-famous comedy theater, and I was enthralled by the unapologetic and innovative ways these performers were calling out injustice. And one night, the main stage actors were testing out material for their show, and Shantira Jackson walks out. She's this unquestionably confident performer. She always appears to be walking on top of the world with nothing but determination in her body language. She spoke in her powerful, rhythmic, almost reverent tone and began to describe what Black heaven would be like. In Black heaven, there are rooms where you can be silent, there are rooms where you can scream, and there are places where you can just be. Black folks never get to just be. And there it was, that familiar sense of the color draining from my face and that pit in my stomach as I confronted another shade of my complacency and acknowledged a third cutting truth. Why do they never get to just be? Why do Black folks and marginalized folks and underprivileged folks never get to just be? Because regardless of our intentions, we are constantly asking people in marginalized communities to be teachers, to be spokespeople for an entire group, and advocates for their own life every single day. We, people of privilege, continue to sit on the sidelines, wildly affected and yet not affected at all. So these are my confrontations with complacency, the moments when my privilege was most sharply revealed to me, and I am so grateful that I've been able to recognize and own these moments, but here's the wildest part. I could have confronted none of this, and my lived experience in this world wouldn't change much. I would be far less aware, completely unempathetic, and my family wouldn't feel as huge and happy as it does now. But I wouldn't be in danger. I would still survive today. That is privilege. That is what we're working to confront, to own, and dismantle. So how do we do it? How do we careen ourselves and our peers out of our complacency, especially those of us who are so resistant to understanding? Obviously, there's no one-size-fits-all answer, but here are 5 things that I found make me more aware and active in resisting injustice. First, listen. Amazing things happen when you just shut up. Listen by educating yourself, then listen to educate others, and stop offering your underprivileged peers apologies or your guilt. Just listen to them. There's learning to be done just by being quiet. Second, speak up, but not over. If you're standing in a room full of people from marginalized communities, they should be the ones speaking, and you should be the ones supporting, listening. Thoughts like, I hear you, I stand with you, I am ready to get to work, are so much more valuable than you realize. You should want to join in their chorus, but you shouldn't be the soloist. Third, humanize, but don't trivialize. Let's guide our privileged peers into understanding that the opinions they have on things like immigration, Black Lives Matter, gay marriage, and any number of issues of inequality are opinions on human lives. So stop asking, what would you do if the victim were your relative or your friend? Why do we have to know them at all? Let's exercise empathy regardless of our relation to the person being affected. Instead, let's ask, why should we allow this to happen to another person? Recently, an image from the travel ban protests at O'Hare went viral. And it's this picture of 2 fathers, one Muslim and one Jewish, and they're both carrying their children on their shoulders. And they're all holding signs. But the sign that hits me the hardest every time is the Muslim father's, which simply reads, empathy. Rather than offering a sign that says, what if your friend or relative were an immigrant? Instead, empathy. Immigrants are people. Humanize, but don't trivialize. Fourth, strive for results, but don't expect them. We often expect to walk away from every conversation having completely changed another person's world, and we should strive for that. But the conversation should be more about establishing an understanding and the potential for future conversations like this one. Likely, the person that we're talking with will not end up at the next Black Lives Matter protest, but if they can understand why we are going to be there, that's a step in the right direction. And finally, start with what you know. For me, that was writing. And for you, it might be something different. Discover and own your unique skill set in the cause, and show up in any way that you know how. All this to say, I'm still scared. I'm still a white, heterosexual, able-bodied, cisgender Catholic person who attempts to confront my complacency and then careen myself out of it, and I fail every day. I catch myself being a passive bystander, and then I push myself to take an active role in a conversation or a situation that allows me to courageously connect. And this includes connecting with people that aren't on my team, people who are resistant to understanding, who spout hate, who are actively asking to remain ignorant. I talk with them. I talk with them about my time at Second City. I talk with them about being a student leader, and I talk about my family. I talk about Zerhoon, about Brickdy, about McDelowit, and as of almost 3 years ago, my niece Fortuna, you can't see her face because she's looking at her mom. I talk about them, these 4 people that make me wake up every single day and say to myself, and now to all of you here, I'm done being complacent. Let's show up and let's get to work. Thank you.